Hi, James. How are you?
Hi Doris, how are you?
Good. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, no, no problem. I enjoy talking to you. This will be the third time, so it's always
I
fun talking
know.
to you.
Well, it's it's good to have an old friend to begin with. That's great.
Yes, that's number one, definitely. Jay Thomas, morning blend. I'm here today with Doris Kearns Goodwin. We're going to talk about this epic portrait of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. Good morning. How are you, Miss Kearns Goodwin?
I'm doing good, and I'm glad to be with you.
Let's talk about this new documentary series, FDR. Tell us about it.
Well, what I'm so glad about is that in a time that we're going through right now, where many people feel overwhelmed by the problems of the country, just imagine what it was like for FDR in 1933 when the Great Depression was at its peak terribleness, or early days of World War II when it was not at all clear we would ever be equipped to fight with Germany. And we got through those crises. And just to watch the leadership of the person that brought us through, and Eleanor, never forgetting Franklin and Eleanor as partners throughout all of this, I think it'll give us courage and confidence and optimism that maybe we can get through where we are now by just remembering what the strengths were that these two people had to lead us through that time.
Would you say that Eleanor was his rock during this time?
Without a question. Or another analogy that he used, he said that she was a welcome thorn in his side, always willing to argue with him, always willing to question his assumptions. I mean, it was Eleanor really who brought women into her weekly press conferences, female reporters, that only female reporters could come. So an entire generation of journalists get their start because of Eleanor. It's Eleanor who sends so many memos to General Marshall about civil rights in the Army that he has to assign a separate general whose only task is to deal with Eleanor Roosevelt. It's Eleanor who argues that women should go to work in the factories, and then once they're there, she gets daycare for them by setting up, through business, model daycare centers. And really, it was Eleanor who was the agitator, constantly being ahead of FDR, but then FDR had the political skill to know he could do this then, he couldn't do all the things she wanted at that time. They're an extraordinary partnership. I loved watching them, just as like I love watching, as you'll see in this documentary, the partnership between Franklin and Churchill. I mean, what a character Churchill is and what a character FDR is. When they first meet, they're both divas, so one talks and the other one then feels grumpy, then he starts talking, and they understand each other. One says, it's fun to be in the same decade with you. Or Churchill says of Roosevelt, it's like opening your first bottle of champagne, that incredible effervescence to be with FDR. They drink until 2 a.m. in the morning, and then Franklin has to get up and run the country. He's exhausted when Churchill leaves, but what a great thing that he was there.
You know, speaking of that, what about being in Tehran with Stalin? Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, I mean, my God, it was an extraordinary thing. What happens there is that, and you'll see archival footage as well as documentary discussions about it, as well as the actors acting out these moments in conference. I mean, Churchill and Roosevelt had a good relationship ahead of time, but Roosevelt understands that he now has to establish a relationship with Stalin. So it means, in a certain sense, teasing Churchill. Churchill understands what's happening, but you'll watch those inner dynamics as Roosevelt's trying to reach out to Stalin at that time.
You know, what I
I'd
found
much rather be
very,
with Churchill.
yeah, what I thought was very interesting when I was looking at this documentary was Franklin Roosevelt not only had to run a country, but his physical health, not just his disability with his legs, but his heart condition. Where was he at mentally during this time?
Well, you know, you can see that in the spring of 1944, he finally goes to a cardiologist, and they determine that he's been suffering from heart disease. And so in that last, year of his life, there's no question that his physical strength has ebbed. There's times when it can just come back when he needs it to. When the GI Bill of Rights passes, he's so excited that you feel that sense of, there's the old Franklin. When he runs for the campaign in the fall of 1944, and he's out on that trail, and he's out there for 8 hours straight, and you see him back again. But clearly, I think most people who saw him knew that his mind was still pretty sharp during most of that time. He just didn't have the energy, the patience, the length of time that he could work. But he gave everything he could to at it until he died. He just felt that he was the one who'd brought us this far, and he wanted to stay as long as he could until that war was wrapped up. That was his dream, I think, There was always some thought that maybe after the wars ended, would he give up the presidency? Nobody knows that, although there was some speculation. But he just wanted us to bring us through the end of that war, and he almost got there.
You know, what's interesting to me is when I was watching this whole thing, I was thinking about today's politics. I was thinking about past politics, and I was trying to figure out who was the strongest president ever. And I've come to maybe two. I'm not sure about three, but two. It would have to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, again, FDR, because of what he had to go with the Great Depression, with the war, and his physical health. And then Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. You tell me.
I'm with you, absolutely. I mean, I think those would be it, Abraham Lincoln and FDR. I mean, just thinking of FDR, just as you say, you know, it's one thing to bring a country through the Great Depression, to have that confidence and optimism and leadership able to mobilize the country, and then knowing that he had to pivot when World War II came, and he has to make peace with the business community, which had been somewhat hostile in those last days of the New Deal, and he forms this incredible partnership with the business community. So eventually they are producing, though we're so far behind at the beginning of the war, we're only 18th in military power in 1940, and we become this powerhouse because of that partnership. A plane is produced every 4 minutes, a tank every 7 minutes, a ship is launched every single day. And then you're right, he's also dealing with his injuries from polio. You watch him in this documentary, which I'm not sure many people fully realized, he couldn't even get out of bed in the morning without somebody helping him. It was an enormous ordeal to put on those braces, to move from a wheelchair to a chair. And you'll watch that, the endless impact of polio. And then, as you say, that last year of his life when his heart was failing him and he still kept going forward. It's an extraordinary picture of bravery and courage, and I really admire him. He's got flaws like every other president does. He disappoints you at times, as every human being does. But overall, there's just an enormous respect for the leadership that he was able to give to the country, and the country responded. You know, he asks them for rationing during the war, and they respond. They can only have 1 cup of coffee a day. They grumble, but they accept it. They can only have 5 gallons of gasoline a week, and somehow they go through that. We were a collective then. We were unified as a nation fighting that cause. And God, would we love to see that again today.
I was about to ask you that. I was definitely about to ask you that. Well, man, I wish we could see that type of leadership and cohesiveness today. Do you think that'll ever happen again in our lifetime?
Well, I've got to believe so. I mean, the older I get, the more I want to see it come back again. I think the media makes it much more difficult today. I mean, when Roosevelt gave his fireside chats, Saul Bellow said, the novelist, you could walk through the street on a hot Chicago night, everybody had their radio on. 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 people, bigger than any entertainment the radio had. And you could look in the window and watch the people staring at their radio set in their living room or their kitchen and hear his voice come out. You could keep walking and not miss a word of what he was saying. And somehow through those radio chats, which he only did 2 or 3 times a year, he understood if he did it too often, it would become routine. That's the problem for our leaders today. They're on all the time, so there's nothing special about it. But everybody listened to those, and they began to be understanding the problems we were facing. There's a story of a construction worker hurrying home one night, and his partner said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, my president, he's coming to speak to me in my living room tonight. It's only right that I be there to greet him when he comes." So that's the sense of intimacy that he created with the country, and they trusted him, and he trusted them. So it's that bond between, he said later that was what mattered to him most, were the letters that he got from the people, even more than the state papers. And there's a moment when somebody who's crying after he dies, and a reporter says to him, "Did you know him?" And he said, "No, I never met him, but he knew me." I mean, that's the extraordinary thing when a public figure is able to make the people feel, "I understand your problems, I have empathy, I'll be there for you when I can."
Wow. We're speaking with Doris Kearns Goodwin about the 3-night documentary event on the History Channel, premiering Memorial Day, FDR. Thank you again for joining us on Morning Blend. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. We'll do this again.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.